Thank you all for accepting my invitation to talk about your important donations of Chicano graphics to the Smithsonian American Art Museum. You are all very special people that cumulatively have given over 225 prints by Chicano artists and their collaborating peers to our museum. This is no small feat, and we are so grateful for your generosity. We wouldn't be celebrating this exhibition without it. Before we start our conversation, I want to briefly introduce you to our guests who are tuning in. And viewers can also find a link to more extensive bios in the chat. Dr. Gilberto Cárdenas is a longtime friend and supporter of the Smithsonian Institution, who was chair of the Smithsonian Latino Center Board for many years and was the brainchild of one of the center's most important programs, the Latino Museum Studies program. A sociologist by training whose research has focused on migration, Dr. Cárdenas was a professor at the University of Texas at Austin and the founding director of the Institute of Latino Studies at Notre Dame. He, alongside with his wife, Dolores Garcia Carrillo, are major donors to museums including the National Museum of Mexican Art, the Blanton Museum, the National Portrait Gallery, and of course, the Smithsonian American Art Museum. Doctors Harriet and Ricardo Romo are a power couple that have been collecting art since the early days of their marriage and throughout their academic careers. Harriet Romo is a professor of sociology at the University of Texas at San Antonio and is also the director of the Child and Adolescent Policy Research Institute and the director of the UTSA Mexico Center. Ricardo Romo is an urban historian whose book, East Los Angeles, History of a Barrio, is now in its 9th edition. He served as the 5th president of the University of Texas at San Antonio from 1999 to 2017. They have been generous donors to libraries and museums, including the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection at the University of Texas at Austin and the McNay Art Museum and the Smithsonian American Art Museum, among others. And last but not least, we are joined by Rosa Terrazas, representing the estate of her aunt, or as I prefer to say, her tia, Margie Santos, who was a passionate activist, professor, social worker, and institution builder who single-handedly developed an impressive collection of Chicano, Chicana, and Latino graphics in the Bay Area. She was an ethnic studies professor at St. Mary's College of California, and in 1977, she co-founded the Chicana Latina Foundation to provide scholarships for Latina college students. She initiated the Dia de los Muertos celebrations in Oakland and worked with the Oakland Museum to establish theirs, and was for many years a staff member at the Mission Cultural Center. Thank you all for joining me.
Thank you.
One thing that unites all of you and Margie Santos is that you all came of age as young people and professionals during the civil rights movement. You went on to become educators and devoted much of your lives to public service and Latinx cultural advocacy. You witnessed and participated in the civil rights era, and it shaped your interest in Chicano graphic arts. And when you donated your works to our museum and others, you helped transform these institutions, making them richer and more accurate of the broad field of American art. It is for these and other reasons that I think of you as activist collectors and donors, because your gifts are making museums more inclusive spaces that honor and serve Chicanx and Latinx artists and histories. So thank you again. My first question is for Gil. You started collecting graphics as a student, went on to become a leading advocate for Latinx representation in American museums, all the while amassing one of the largest private collections of Chicano and Latino graphics in the country. Why was it so important for you to collect graphic arts? And why do you consider this medium so important?
Thank you, Carmen. I always refer to my collection as a bottom-up collection, since at that time I was not rich when I started collecting, nor even interested in collecting established artists when I began my collecting in the mid-1960s. As you mentioned, I was very involved with the Chicano movement at that time as a student, and using my camera uh, as a way to document our struggles during that time. I was able to connect with many artists who were creating posters and prints, mainly serigraphs, etchings, woodcuts, as well as drawings, paintings, and murals. These works drew attention to issues that were addressing our struggles, and that really made a big impact on me. I really got interested in talking with them, addressing issues about our community. Um, I remember reading a book, can't remember the title, where Jean Charlot was quoted about his idea of art for the people, which really solidified my interest in collecting works that were created for the purpose of advancing our conditions, the conditions of our community, and also at that time, artwork that was not necessarily created for sale in the art market. There are artists like Martín Montoya in California, Daniel Manrique from Mexico City, from Te Invito Arte Acá, who really were very focused on that effort to really do art for the people. This interest continued when I moved to Notre Dame and then later to Texas, and began to, at that point, began to work with artists who weren't necessarily Chicano, the Puerto Rican artists and other Latino artists in the US, and then some artists in Mexico. I really felt that this was important and didn't feel that the museums had an interest in Chicano Puerto Rican artists, for example, nor was there much interest in studying this art in terms of universities. For example, the Smithsonian didn't even know what they had in their collection until they requested for a serious review, and they were able to share it finally and did a good job in bringing this to the general public's attention.
Thank you, Gil. Really have always admired all that you have done, and gifting this collection, part of your collection to us, is just one of the many things that you've done to really help, bring Latinx culture to the forefront of the work of cultural institutions, in the United States. So I'm very grateful for all that you have done.
A big part of that began with Sister Karen at Self-Help Graphics. I was involved with Self-Help Graphics for many, many years on their board, as well just as a collector and a supporter. And she really encouraged me to open up a gallery in Austin, Galerías Sin Fronteras, which I did around 1986, and then moved downtown when I bought a building a few years, actually in the mid-1990s, and really made an effort to make this work available and to people who were impacted by the kind of issues that the work was addressing. So I wanted it to be affordable, as well as work that that would help them understand their situation better in terms of the visual and graphics that were part of that experience.
Thank you for raising the importance of self-help graphics, which I think brings us to engaging with Drs. Harriet and Ricardo Romo, who have also had a very close connection with self-help graphics. And so Harriet and Ricardo, you have been national collectors really for decades and have established close bonds with many artists and Chicano print centers like Self-Help Graphics. And in fact, Ricardo, you mentored Richard Duardo as a high school student. And later he went on to become an important artist, a master printer at Self-Help Graphics, and a founder of print shops of his own. We have one of his wonderful prints in our exhibition. Can you tell us about why so much of your collecting has focused on working closely with print centers?
What's the last part? Can you tell us about
how the work has we've been connected with the print centers like Gordo Center and Sam Coronado Center and other.
Okay. So let me start by saying that in right after the walkouts, I was teaching at Franklin High School, which was one of the schools that had a walkout. And I was a social studies teacher, and we decided in 1969 that I wanted to teach a Mexican American history class. It's probably one of the first Mexican American history classes taught in a high school, probably among the first half dozen anywhere in America. And in my class was Richard Eduardo. I did mentor him, and I did help him get in, pursue and do stuff like Upward Bound, and he applied to UCLA and later so forth. Then we sort of moved away. But in 1970, I moved to Cal State Northridge, where I taught in Chicano Studies with Chicano Studies History with Rudy Acuna. And I had a couple of students, including Oscar Castillo, who's in your collection as a photographer. He was one of my students, and another Bejerano. So I'm teaching at Cal State Northridge, and I just started my research work, PhD at UCLA. UCLA was doing a Chicano mural at that time. The Cal State folks were beginning to do some posters and work. And I realized there's nothing in between. I'm not going to buy a mural. And this is just starting, and I'm going to follow it. And fortunately, I did follow it. And by 1975, 76, I was already at UC San Diego. And Harriet and I went to a show, Los Four, and then Chicanismo, and then the ASCO show. And we decided we need to do something like that in San Diego. So we put together a show in San Diego in 1975, 76. And my in terms of the person most active on the campus with us was Yolanda Lopez. Yolanda Lopez did some great posters of the Chicano movement. She had a great art piece, of course. She's famous for art as well. So we got a very quick introduction because Yolanda and that group said, you got to go to Self-Help Graphics and meet Sister Karen and convince them to lend you a bunch of art for the show in San Diego called Arte Picante. So we went to San Diego, and I believe even at that time, Cardenas and I were talking and may have helped with some names. But we did put a show together in San Diego. It was really up there among the 3 or 4 early shows of Chicano art in California. We had some really good artists. So that's how we sort of quickly, moved and jumped. But Harriet was interested initially in Mexican art, and we collected Mexican art and then realized, we got to shift here. This is starting to really blossom. So I should tell you some part about that.
Yeah. Ricardo and I were both, when we were in LA, right in the middle of the Chicano movement, the school walkouts, the great boycotts, and we did boycott it, in front of the grocery stores. We participated in some of the meetings about the walkouts in the LA schools. So we were both working with young people I was in Lenox and Venice, before Venice was a marina, and he was in East LA. And so when we heard about Self-Help Graphics and realized that they were reaching out to young people, they were bringing in artists from the community and showing these young people how to do the prints, and the work that they were doing were so representative of what was going on in LA and the issues involved in the students that we both taught. And then when we went to their exhibits, they were so beautiful that we bought as many as we could. Of course, then we were, on teacher salaries going to graduate school. And like Gil, we couldn't afford very much, but we'd buy as many as we could. And we weren't collecting, we just liked them. They were meaningful to us. We liked what they were doing with the young people. And eventually we had so many that we realized we had a collection, and we kind of stumbled into being collectors because we liked the work and it resonated with things that were important to us in our own work with children and youth.
Yeah, early on we could call us the accidental collectors.
Yes.
That sounds like a good title of a book. Well, your work with young people and in your contact with artists, brings us to our next guest that is with us here today, Rosa Terrazas, who I met in the midst of doing research for Printing the Revolution. And I visited her and her family on a rainy day. It was pouring, and it was just it was kind of oxymoronic because it was such an ugly day, but the time that I spent with you and your family was so beautiful, and it was just so powerful to see Margie's collection, right, that she had amassed so lovingly over the course of her life, and it was truly impressive and mind-blowing, really, for me. And I'm wondering, Rose, if you could just share some remembrances with us of your tia, of Margie Santos, and what led her to build this archive that your family generously donated a part of to us.
Oh, thank you so much, Carmen. I feel so grateful to be amongst such amazing leaders in this collecting of this incredible art and history. And I'm so grateful to be speaking on her behalf. And she was known to me as Thea, and we essentially lived together. We had this in East Oakland is where I grew up, and we had the front house was my family's house, and then in the back there was a back house, and that's where she lived. So I grew up going in between my house and her house constantly. And in my adult life, I was, saw her often and went poster hunting with her. So definitely had a really close relationship until she passed away about 6 years ago. So in terms of what I think inspired her collecting of these gorgeous, important works of art and, documentation of Chicano history is that, she was born and raised in Richmond, California, with her little brother, who was my father. And she herself, I think, witnessed her parents working very hard to make a good life for them, make a better life for them. And though they did a really good job doing that, she really saw the level of discrimination and prejudice against Mexican Americans and Chicanos at that time, so much so that her parents even declined to teach her and her brother Spanish because they didn't want them to have an accent. And I think as she was through that act, it communicated so much about the environment at that time. She went on to San Jose State University, and I think, she always talked about what an amazing eye-opening experience it was for her to be with more of la gente, la raza. And I think it was a really eye-opening experience where she finally was around a community of peers who were Chicano identifying and that were in the middle of the Chicano movement, the civil rights movement. And she saw, oh, I don't just have to just take this discrimination, this injustice. There's actually, vehicles and avenues and groups of people who want to do something about it. And so I think that completely influenced the rest of her life. As you noted so well, Carmen, earlier, every single job she had, paid or unpaid, all were connected to trying to promote La Raza, the history. She loved just being around anybody who was doing anything to forward, the preservation of Chicano history and culture. And so, everything from being a Vista worker and working with Latinx youth to, becoming a Chicano studies professor. And so in each one of these parts, she somehow, I think a lot of her friends, when she was in college and then beyond, all ended up, activists and artists. They were just one and the same during that time. And so she just became just so enamored with the direct communication that posters had with her people, with their people, with our people. And I think somehow she intuited that that was the only medium that was documenting what was going on in those communities. There were no scholars documenting anything. It was truly those posters, and she intuited that, and she began collecting. And so I think anybody who knew her and knows her now always kind of can smile and laugh a little bit, because every time I think she saw anybody she knew, she was like, do you have any posters for me? What did you collect at the last conference? I mean, she would even take me as a young girl. We would, she'd be babysitting me. She's like, okay, we're taking Bart. We're going to the Mission in San Francisco. And I was like, what are we going to do? And she was like, well, of course, we're just going to walk around and take posters off telephone poles. Like, come on. So that was how I spent a lot of time with her. And that's part of how, I mean, other than obviously being very close with many of the artists who created these incredible posters, but also she was just out in the community all the time asking, hey, that event's over. Can I have that poster that's in your shop window? And doing it that way. And one last thing I'll just say is that I will share a quick personal story about my experience with Margie, which I think is representative of what she wants the posters to be. And I remember I was a girl in elementary school, and somehow I had developed, and it's really sad for me to talk about it, but I had developed an embarrassment for being Mexican. And I remember I would lie to friends about my ethnicity when they would ask. I would say I was Hawaiian. And this perspective I had did not come from my family. It came from the just terrible discriminatory images of Mexican Americans in the media during that time. It was the 80s. And my aunt picked up on it. And she, I remember, started Chicano studies lessons for me. I would march over there on Wednesday afternoons, and she began the process of really educating me about our culture, our history, showing me the posters, showing me imagery of women who looked like me. And that just had a completely transformative experience for me, made me begin to love myself and my identity. And I think that's what she really wants for the Latinx community and others to see in these posters, is to see themselves and see a validation of their experience. So I think that might have been a really big motivator for her and her collecting these.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing these wonderful stories about your tia. She sounds like an amazing person. You're lucky to have her, and we're really lucky that your family decided to donate part of her archive to us. We're very grateful. And I wanted to ask a question of all of you, which is, why were you interested? Why did you decide to share your collection, part of your collection, with the Smithsonian, and by extension with our visitors? If we could talk a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Well, one of the things that's been important for me and Ricardo is that we want to share the art with institutions that will make it available to, again, young people, or will present it in a way that's educational about the experiences of the Latino community and the Chicano community. And, when hearing Rosa talk about her aunt and the young people identifying with those images, when we shared some of our art with the McNay and they put together the Estampas collection and exhibit, we went to some of the openings as it traveled to East LA and to Raleigh, North Carolina, and Chicago, the Mexican Museum. And we could see these young people standing in front of pieces and just gazing at the images and poring over them. And you could just tell that they identified with them. They then might go on and become artists or become teachers, but it resonated with them. And that was important to us about where we gave our art. Was it going to have that kind of impact?
Yeah, I'll follow up. And so we also donated. Well, we went to a talk at the McNay, and this was about a little over 10 years ago. And the speaker said, we got this donation of 44 prints of Mexican art. And we're just so excited. And this is just really, he talked on and on for actually more than an hour about this collection that they had received 44 prints. So we decided, we have collected a lot. We're very fortunate. And in our later years, we were able to acquire more and more prints. So we made a donation of 200 prints. And from that, they selected 60 for the Estampas show. Then we decided this is going to have an impact because here is San Antonio. We live in San Antonio with 65% Mexican population. It's a museum that hasn't been visited as much by Latinos. What if we just made it? So we're now up to 600 prints in terms of donation. But we go to some of the shows, and one of the shows that they did, I was so happy, was they did a show on only Richard Eduardo. And they did about 30, 20, 25 maybe of his works, the gallery. The Estampa show that we did broke the Andy Warhol record for the most people to see a show on any one opening day. So here we are. Up to that point, they hadn't collected any Chicano art at all. Then they collect it, and it then breaks the records. So it was just so gratifying to see that. So we believe that sharing our art and our benefits with the community is very satisfying to us.
You know, I have a long history with the Smithsonian. I was lucky to be appointed back in 1992 to serve on a committee to look at the overall position of the museum with respect to Latino art and culture. And I'm not going to go through all the different committees I participated in, but over the years I worked with 5 secretaries, even going back into the 70s. And so I began to really develop a strong commitment to work with others who are working to change the institution inside, as well as people who are outside trying to make a difference to get the Smithsonian. We see the Smithsonian as a national museum, and it tells the story of the American people nationally. But how can it tell it if it doesn't have an understanding of the Latino situation in the United States, nor does it have an understanding about Latino art? It didn't have the curatorial staff that it has now, and there are many things that were lacking. And the secretaries actually admitted that. They were not opposed. They really, it was, I think, pretty much the face value, but we did a lot of research and presentations. So I'm pleased that over the years, they made a lot of changes. And throughout the Smithsonian, not just American art, but other units of the Smithsonian, and began to hire curators and a greater number of personnel at the museum to help out. We're real pleased that the Smithsonian, Carmen, thank you, Carmen, that you've selected some 70 works from our collection, and that the gift is now part of the permanent collection. So I think in many ways, a lot of us who have been involved with community arts organizations and trying to promote and advance Latino artists have recognized that it's important to have Latino culture as American culture, to be understood as American culture, and for the whole world that comes to the Smithsonian, not just in the US, but from abroad as well, to recognize Chicano culture as American culture and to see it at the Smithsonian, to study the work created by these artists, the histories, and the other materials that are made available through your work, as well as the other institutions at the Smithsonian.
Another thing to add to that is the impact that having this art in institutions like the Smithsonian, like the McNay, like the prominent museums around the country, what this does for the Latino artist, for the Chicano artist. That I was very moved when Sam Coronado saw one of his first pieces to be in a major museum. And he said that, it was one of the most self-fulfilling incidences in his career. And so this is important for the artist as well. And many of these artists are not known to the curators until they see them in your collection, Gil, or in Rosa, in your aunt's collection and in our collection. And then they recognize the talented community that's out there that more people should be aware of. So these kinds of exhibits are doing wonderful things for the community, but also for the Chicano artist as well.
Yes, and I'll maybe just briefly add that, it was a complete honor to donate works to the Smithsonian, to have this opportunity to have not only this incredible part of Chicano history and artwork be available on a national scale, but also to elevate someone such as my aunt, Margie Santos, who was a queer woman of color who was really a trailblazer. And those are the kinds of role models that we need to see elevated right now. And also the individuals that are depicted in the posters and the artwork are also role models, and representation really matters. And we actually have all the role models we need. We just need to have them be shown, displayed, talked about, written about. And that's a huge part, Carmen, of why we did this, was because we know what an incredible job the Smithsonian does with allowing scholars access, students access, digital access. So thank you for letting these kind of stories and role models be able to be actually seen.
Well, thank all of you, because we could not have put together this exhibition without all of your contributions. And I want to say that in working on the exhibition catalog, I really wanted in my essay to highlight the contributions of the artists that we present in our show, the way that they have transformed American art, the way that they have innovatively embraced and redefined the graphic tradition. But I also wanted to highlight the importance of all of you, right? As collectors, as activist collectors, and that's a really important part of this story as well. So I want to really thank all of you again for being with me tonight, and also for making these amazing contributions to the Smithsonian American Art Museum that will have ripple effects for generations to come. So thank you all, and I hope to see you at some point in Washington and invite you and tour you through the exhibition. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Tomás Ibarra Fausto, who gave Sam an important collection of 60 Chicano prints in 1995, which established the foundation of our collection of Chicanx graphics, and which inspired the exhibition that we're celebrating tonight. Dr. Tomás Ibarra Fausto is a renowned scholar and cultural worker whose writings and research laid the foundations of the field of Chicano art and culture. He has been a professor, philanthropist, curator, and a longtime Smithsonian supporter who has served on the Smithsonian National Latino Board. He donated his papers to the Archives of American Art, and his collection is one of the top 5 collections consulted by scholars at the archives. This was around the same time that he donated part of his graphic collection to SAM. Tomás, one thing that unites you and all of the other major print donors to SAM's collection is that you came of age as young people and professionals during the civil rights movement. You went on to become educators and devoted much of your lives to public service and Latinx cultural advocacy. You witnessed and participated in the civil rights era, and it shaped your interest in Chicano graphic arts. And when you donated works to our museum and others, you helped transform these institutions, making them richer and more accurate of the broad field of American art. It's for these reasons that I think of you, and all of the other donors as activist collectors and donors, because your gifts made our museums more inclusive spaces that honor and serve Chicanx and Latinx artists and histories. So thank you again, Tomás, for your contribution. So Tomás, your collection of Chicano graphics was amassed over your long career. While you were writing some of your most important texts like Rascuatismo, A Chicano Sensibility, which really remains an iconic and influential essay in the field. Given your broad knowledge, where do you place Chicano graphic arts within the foundation of Chicano art and culture?
Well, I think the foundation of Chicano art and culture and visual arts, I think that Mexican Americans live us in as I recall as a child, it was like an enchanted world where graphics, for example, in calendars and in church material, there were devils and there were angels and there were all kinds of graphic arts all around us. The stores, for example, mom and pop stores used to have the names of them, La Bonita or
For example, if you went to a butcher, the sign for the butcher might be a pig inside a cauldron being cooked. And so you know that was a butcher. And so a lot of the stores had visual images that told you what they were selling or what they were doing. And in the mom and pop stores, in the drug stores, in the botanicas, you saw a lot of visual. And I think one of the important things was, for example, one of the major, I think, central ideas about where Chicano poster art, graphic art came from was the calendars, the calendarios that every year were given by stores. Every Christmas you would get a calendario, and it would have a visual, and it would also have text. And so we grew up with textual and visual things, the things that later became transformed into posters everywhere. And very important to me was the fact that we learned not by only looking at the visuals, but also hearing orally the stories that the visuals portrayed. For example, a very, very famous calendar is by Jesus Helguera, who was a master of calendar art. And it's about, everybody has seen this picture of this Aztec god with the big feathers holding a damsel in his arms like she's fainted. And it was kind of strange for a child to be looking at this. And so you would ask, Mom, what is that? And she would say, oh, that's a story of Popocatépetl and Ixtaccíhuatl, the Mexican volcanoes, the Popo, and look, you see the person holding with the big penacho, the big feathers, he's Popo, and Ixta was his wife. And the story was that there were two young people that fell in love. He was from he was aristocratic, and she was poor, and their families didn't want them to mix. This is all pre-Columbian stuff. And so the gods send them away because they knew that they couldn't marry. So they send them away to be together into the mountains. And their love was so profound that the gods turned them into the volcanoes, Popocatépetl and Ixtaccíhuatl. And Popo is the one that has the fiery volcano, and Ixtaccíhuatl is a sleeping lady. And so then you begin to understand, the relationship between myth and story and visual. And so this growing up with all of this visual material, my mom used to cut them up every end of the year when the year ended, and just save the visuals and put them up. They were like posters, put them up on our kitchen wall. And so all of them, there were some, like, for example, the Virgen de Guadalupe, a very important icon in Chicano iconography. And again, you would say, well, who is this lady? And why is she, why are all these roses around her? And she would say, she would tell you the story about how the Virgen appeared in this place where it was a pilgrimage site for pre-Columbian goddesses. And the Virgen of Guadalupe was actually Tonantzin, the mother earth. And she would then say, she represents, La Virgen de Guadalupe represents the mother earth, and the mother earth we should really take care of. And so we're learning sort of like how to take care of plants and nature, because at one day you will die and the mother earth will come and take you away, and you will go back into her bosom as you're her child of earth, and you will go back to the earth in the tomb. And so there might be a picture of Coatlicue, the mother of the gods, who also represented, the mother earth that one day you were going to. It was kind of scary for a kid to be hearing this, but you were learning the traditions, the mythical traditions from the calendars. And the thing that's important is that they would tell you the story while you were looking at it. So looking at the visual and telling the story became very important in the Chicano movement, because the posters that they had, a lot of them had text. Like there's a very famous one, with that says "Cesen deportación," cease deportation, and so it had barbed wire as an image, and then it had the text. So you begin learning the political consciousness was being born and presented in visual form. The posters also were very important in teaching us our history, because they had iconic, and I'm saying iconic images of heroes and heroines from the historic past, whether it's Lolita Lebron in Puerto Rican posters, or Frida Kahlo in Chicano posters, or many other images of people that were important in the history. And so you were learning your history. Again, you would say, well, who is that person? And she would say, well, Lolita Lebron was one of the leaders for Puerto Rican independence, and so on. So the posters, the important thing that I'm trying to stress over and over is that it's oral and visual. And later on, when the Chicano poster movement came to prominence, it still had this visual and oral tradition. People would tell you, if you didn't know who Lolita Lebron was, they would tell you who she was. And so posters, I think, were very important in getting us to know our history and our culture. A lot of the posters also had, for example, a lot of the posters had Day of the Dead, for the Day of the Dead. So they had the calaveras. And in order to learn about the calaveras, you would learn about Jose Guadalupe Posada, who was really one of the precursors of creating the Day of the Dead images that Chicanos later used in the movement. And also, so the calaveras, were whimsical figures and so you didn't get to be afraid of death, because it was like and you knew that they were like creatures in another world, and they were funny. And so you also learn about living and dying from the post. They had very significant social, political, and cultural aspects to them.
Thank you so much, Lamas. You're speaking about posters, and it's as if you're narrating aspects of our exhibition and different parts of the exhibition. So thank you so much. That's why your gift was so foundational and has really been the inspiration for this current exhibition. I wondered if you could also talk about why you collected these graphic works. As I mentioned earlier, you at the time, during the civil rights era, you were a graduate student, a professor. Eventually you became a cultural worker, a philanthropist, and curator. And it was over the course of your career that you collected and amassed these works. Why was it so important for you to preserve these graphic works?
I think that one of the things that was interesting to me is that that I kept seeing all over, like the posters would be, they had different formats. They were not just, the posters as we see them. Sometimes the posters were reproduced in community newspapers, like Tintan and other periodicals of the period, and in newspapers. And so they were put out like a central, like an image of the big image was inserted into the poster. So when you got the newspaper, the community-based newspaper that talked, the Chicano movement newspapers about politics and what was going on, there was also a poster included. And I liked the idea that it was the notion was that art was for everybody. You didn't have to go to the museum to see a poster or to see art, Chicano art. It came to you in the form of these pages inside this cultural supplements that had that were part of the community newspaper movement. So again, it was a tie-in between the visual and the oral and the written. And so I started thinking, I would see them, they were just posted on walls and posted on posts around the neighborhood. And since nobody wanted them, I started sort of taking them off the wall, or would ask, you know, like they were like in front of a lot of Latino organizations, you know, do you have another poster like that? And they said, yeah. Could I have one? They said yes. Or sometimes they would say, yes, we're selling them as a fundraiser, and they cost like $5. So I would give them $5. And so I started amassing a collection of posters from the community itself, from the walls of the community and from organizations in the community. And I really like them as a form of art, because they were a vernacular form. And I think that there are two, the Chicano art movement and the Chicano political movement made art, I think, in two phases. One was fine art, and the other, you know, fine art that had relation, all the art movements and, you know, the fine art from, except that we, in the fine art, we included images and iconographies from religious, from political, and also from the poster making traditions of many Latin American countries. The posters from Cuba, the posters from Puerto Rico, the posters from many of the hippie posters from the US. So it was a multicultural image bank that artists drew from in order to make the political statement. And so a lot of the women would make images that had women heroines or sheroes, as they called them at that time, about the women's struggles in Latin America with you know, graphic art, but also again the words, Viva la Revolución, Adelante, Pa'lante, you know, and so the posters had both a political and an intellectual, visual dimension. And I think the idea was that all art, including posters, had two major points. One was to inform you about what was going on politically, culturally, and also to delight you with the form and the color and the fact of how form and color function to give you this aesthetic sense. So they taught you, but they also gave you an aesthetic feeling for beauty and for what art really is. And so these were the reasons that I started collecting and how I started my collection.
Thank you, Tomas. I've recently started using the word generous when thinking about the works of art in our collection, the Chicano graphics in our collection, and that the artists were really being generous with viewers, with the public, both in terms of, you know, the aesthetics of their message and then the politics of their message as well. Why did you decide to give your works to the Smithsonian American Art Museum in 1995?
Well, when I had a substantial number of posters, I started giving a few to many of the organizations that I was working with in the Chicano political movement, the Movimiento Chicano. I gave posters to the Mexican Museum in San Francisco. I gave posters to the National Museum of Mexican Art in Chicago. I gave posters to Chicano studies programs, you know, small amounts, 2 or 3 that they could use for teaching purposes, educational purposes. But the bulk of my collection, I decided to give to the Smithsonian, not only because I have such a long history with the Smithsonian working, as you said, in many of the, you know, the attempts to make the Smithsonian reflect the breadth of a multicultural society. It was just at the time when ethnic groups were becoming to recognize that they were a part of American art, and the posters were a part of American art as well. And so I started, you know, I had worked a lot with, for example, the beginning of the not only the artistic, trying to get curators and trying to get, you know, Chicano art put into the different art museums, the web of museums of the Smithsonian, but also in terms of thinking that everything had, you know, an importance, and we needed not only janitors, you know, so when they would greet people as they came to the museum, people that spoke Spanish, curators that spoke Spanish, people that took guides that spoke Spanish. So I think one of the major contributions at that point was when we published toward that very significant thing about willful neglect. The willful neglect, which I think is sort of like the cornerstone for what later happened at the Smithsonian. Willful neglect said that in every aspect of the Smithsonian, both there weren't enough Latinos. There weren't enough Latino curators, there weren't enough Latino guards, there weren't enough Latino workers, kitchen workers, everything. And so it was an attempt to say, we've got to infuse the Latino presence into the Smithsonian. Then later on, I also edited the second important, I think, almost manifesto towards a shared authority, in which I stated that the Smithsonian could work together with local Chicano arts organizations in different communities to create, to really create a museum that reflected the breadth of the multiplicity of the United States as a multicultural, multilingual institution. And so I said, well, I should, since I have all these posters and the museum is beginning to really include Latinos in all its facets, and worked also with the idea of creating a Latino museum, the Museum of the Latino Experience in the United States. I said, this is a place that's doing so well that I should give my collection to the Smithsonian. A lot of people wanted the collection, you know, Chicano studies programs, museums, but I decided to give it to the Smithsonian because I think a collector, as a collector, you want your collection to have, I think, 3 things. You want your collection to be kept together as a whole and not dispersed. And a lot of the community organizations, you know, they would loan them out or whatever, and they never kept them together. You wanted somebody to take care. You wanted a curator, a special curator, to take care of the collection, repair it, make sure that it was, you know, available. And thirdly, you wanted to have that it should have access, that people can come and use it. Scholars, students, and the ordinary folks. And so in a lot of these places, like in the college collections that I had given, you had to have a student card, because if you weren't a student, you couldn't use a collection. You couldn't, only students could use it. So the general public was omitted. But the Smithsonian was the only organization that I found that could meet all three requirements. It would keep the collection, the poster collection, together. It would hire a curator that would take care of it and would enlarge it by asking other people and other collectors to give them to the collection. It would be taken care of for perpetuity, and it would allow scholars to use the collection and to come, if not coming to Washington, they could somehow send copies of their collection, and people could use it everywhere. So the Smithsonian was the only place that could meet all three requirements: keep the collection together, have a curator to take care of it in perpetuity, and make it allow it for use by many people. So this was the reason. And the other reason, and equally significant, because I felt that all of these Latino arts organizations, Puerto Rican arts organizations, Cuban arts organizations, were working for their ethnic communities specifically, but the Smithsonian had a broad base to include all the communities, and that it was beginning to realize that Chicano art was American art, and American art is Chicano art, and the Smithsonian was the only one that had that viewpoint, and therefore I decided that this is a place which is the core, where all the cultural heritage and the cultural treasures of the country are held. And I felt modestly that the Chicano posters needed to be in a place that was where the heritage and the treasures of American art were held, because Chicano art was American art. And that's why I decided to give it to the Smithsonian.
Well, thank you, Tomas, for your words and for your donation. I hope that we have lived up to your hope and desire. I think this exhibition is probably a wonderful manifestation of what you had hoped for when you gave us that gift in 1995. I wonder, just in closing, what do you hope visitors will come away with after they come to our exhibition and see many of the works that you and other donors gave to us?
Well, I hope that visitors will go away with a feeling and a knowledge, because the posters, the curators done a wonderful job in all the exhibitions that I've seen at the Smithsonian of telling, just like you did as I was growing up, that would tell you what is in the picture, so you could learn and you could understand and you could learn the history of the image and where the image came from and what it represented. And so both, and they would explain how posters are part of the artistic tradition of many, many cultures, and certainly part of American culture. We have, posters that were made for the hippie movement, posters that were made for the different women's political movement, so that in many ways, I want them to understand that poster is a legitimate, important, significant part of the American art experience, and that the Latino posters within this experience are not just part of a cultural appendage. It's not an appendage to American art. They are American art. And American art is Latino art, and Latino art is American art. And this is what I hope that they go away feeling, that the culture is multicultural, multilingual, very cosmopolitan, and that now, particularly now in these times, when we really need art as part of a way to include, a way to make us feel that we all belong to one common culture, even though it has many variations, that there is, that Latino posters come, from, have elements and pictures and so on from pre-Columbian, from colonial, from African, from all the cultures in the Americas. And so that America is not a country, but a continent. And that Nuestra America, with an accent, that Nuestra America is American art. And so the posters, I want them to realize they are a part and an integral part of what it is to be an American in the 2020s. And also, I want to just say that I'm very happy that because of this collection and because of all the struggles from many, now the Smithsonian has curators in many different museums. Now the Smithsonian is collecting art from many of the culture of the Americas, as well as it already had cultures from Africa and from Asia and so on. And so it's completing a picture of who we are as Americans. And I'm very happy that it has spawned, this collection has spawned many new talleres, some that were very significant, Taller Boricua in New York, Self-Help Graphic in Los Angeles. But now, aside from all those that were the basis for the creation of posters, we have a whole generation of Latinx artists that are creating new posters, telling their stories, their contemporary stories of what their culture means to them and what American culture is becoming. And that's why I think posters are significant, and that's what I would like visitors to take away.
Well, thank you, Tomas, for your words, and again for your foundational gift that is really allowing us to tell this story. And as Claudia Zapata and I worked on this exhibition, we were very interested in showing those intergenerational connections that you just mentioned, that really motivated our desire to expand on the foundation that your donation gave to us. So thank you so much.
And I'm delighted. I just want to say that I'm delighted that you're beginning to get generation Latinx or Z, like Claudia, who's done so much for her generation as part of like if she works with you, that you come from this interior generation of the movimiento, and now you can pass on your knowledge to her to make new visions of the America that we are becoming.
Thank you for that. That thought, I am in total agreement. It's been a pleasure to work with Claudia and to have our own intergenerational synergy happening.
Right.
It's been an important part of this project.
Right.
So thank you, Tomas, and I look forward to giving you a tour of the show, hopefully sometime in the near future.
Okay,
So
I look forward to it too, and I look forward to the catalog too. So thank you very much, Carmen. I really appreciate it, and I hope some of these ideas will be worthy. You can edit and do whatever you want with them, and as you make the presentation.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much.